Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, we have a very special guest author. His name is Ray McGinnis. He's publishing a book on September 11th, 2021. Very important marker, 2 decades since September 11th, 2001. The title of his book is Unanswered Questions, What the September 11th Families Asked and the 9/11 Commission Ignored. And he has foreword by very significant people who have studied 9/11 or other kind of parapolitical topics such as James W. Douglas, Paul Craig Roberts, David Ray Griffin, Graham McQueen, and Lisa Pease, who I interviewed about her book, A Lie Too Big to Fail, The Real History of the Assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. So you can listen to that on William Ramsey Investigates. But there are very important questions unanswered, just like the title says, about the commission. And I'm very delighted that Mr. McGinnis wrote this book, and I really delighted in reading it. So, Ray McGinnis, are you there?
I'm here. It's great to speak with you, William.
Awesome. Well, thanks for agreeing. Congratulations on the book, and thanks for agreeing to the interview. For people who may not have heard your background, can you talk about your background and what led you to write this book, Unanswered Questions?
Okay. Well, my background. I have initially I was involved in Christian education. I was national staff for youth and young adult ministries with the United Church of Canada. I have an undergraduate degree in religious studies and also studied English literature and political science and history at University of Toronto. And, then I was involved at a retreat center in the Okanagan Valley in rural British Columbia, Canada for 4 years. And I made a switch out of that into teaching journal writing, memoir, poetry, working with grief and loss groups with people in healthcare facilities as they recovered from their injuries and illnesses, and also helping people write about their life story. And on September 11th, I was in Joshua Tree National Park in southeastern California. I was the only person who was not an American citizen, with 60 folks from the U.S. or across the USA. We were off the grid, no televisions in sight. But that morning on September 11th, I was told with the other folks about what had happened, that at that point the towers had been hit and the Pentagon had been hit. One of the people in the room had financial advisors who were managing their stock portfolio who worked in one of the Twin Towers, and they were afraid that person had died. Turned out later on that they survived. But it was a very immediate story, just degrees of separation right away from people who were in the building. And so it took me 5 days to get out of the USA back to Vancouver, Canada. There were no flights. I got across the border on a bus, and then life moved on. It was war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq. The 9/11 Commission was really off the radar as far as the news went up where I live. Did see Condoleezza Rice over dinner one night on the TV with her statements to the 9/11 Commission, but otherwise that was an inquiry that was not well covered here in Canada. And so I happened upon a book in 2007 by Kristen Breitweiser called Wake Up Call, The Political Education of 9/11 Widow. Her husband Ron had died in the South Tower, and this was a story about how she and others formed the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Independent Commission and forced a reluctant Bush administration to have an investigation. And I was looking at this book and decided to buy it, thinking, how can it be that 6 years after the attacks, I've heard nothing about these families? All I knew was that the families had lost loved ones. I'd read some obituaries that were reprinted in the Vancouver Sun and from the New York Times. And I didn't know anything about the families pushing for an investigation. So I read the book with interest. I found my way onto the Family Steering Committee's website, which is still there, where people can read their many hundreds of questions, only 9% which were addressed by the 9/11 Commission. And I began to read Paul Thompson's book, The Terror Timeline. I read New York Times reporter Philip Shannon's book, Uncensored on the backstory to the 9/11 Commission, and Jeanette McKinley's memoir, Fortunate, a diary of 9/11, and a few other books. And I just tucked them away and didn't think I'd ever end up writing a book. But I found around 2016 that whenever I mention this occasionally, nobody seemed to know that I talked with in the States or in Canada about the Family Steering Committee. It wasn't a name that they were familiar with, even though these folks had been, Kristen Breitweiser and others had been on Chris Matthews' Hardball. They'd been interviewed by Gail Sheehy on PBS, and they'd had numerous interviews in local papers in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. But I thought somebody needs to write a book about their story in addition to all of their occasional showing up on September 11th, writing yet another editorial asking for a new investigation. And I thought someone needs to also document in a book, in a physical book, these efforts, because the families, there were a series of different efforts after the 9/11 Commission. And so I thought I'm gonna try and write this book and do some interviews and also watch the testimony of the families who spoke to the 9/11 Commission.
Right, and even the commission itself may not have even happened without the you use the acronym FSC to shorten the Family Steering Committee for Independent 9/11 Commission. Hold on, just. Sorry about that. So can you talk about how the 9/11 happened in 2001? What happened after that, and then what led to the actual commission itself?
So in the fall of 2001, I mean, a lot of the families initially are grieving. You've got reporters following the grieving families to their funerals, and there's a lot of tears and grief. And then the Congress decides to pass a bailout package for the airlines. And while that was happening, somebody in Congress thought, this isn't going to look good to pass a $15 billion bailout package for the airlines unless we also give the families who lost loved ones something as well. And so that was now moving forward throughout the fall of 2001. The families are taking note of all of that. And the condition was you can have your, whatever, $1.8 million on the condition that you do not ever sue the U.S. government for anything related to the attacks.
Right.
So you've got some families, Ellen Mariani and Beverly Eckert, who ended up on the FSC, whose husband Sean Rooney died, were a number of the families who decided we're just going to go ahead and see if we can have our day in court with the U.S. government. But while that was happening, many other families said, well, even if we can't have a day in court with the U.S. government, let's have an inquiry. I mean, we've had this, things like the Challenger space shuttle, Monica Lewinsky having a liaison with former President Bill Clinton.
Right, they spent like $70 million on that, or $50 million.
Yeah, that was really important with the blue dress and everything. So the family saw, nearly 3,000 people have died, and we want to have an investigation. And so you've got Dick Cheney being what Kristen Breitweiser refers to as the attack dog, always glaring and always saying we can't afford to have any money. We're busy with the war on terror. This is a distraction.
Right, the terrorists win if we do this commission, right, or something like that. Yes,
the terrorists are going to win if we have this commission. So eventually, the families went to Washington, D.C. They had a rally on the 11th of June in 2002. About 300 family members came. Mindy Kleinberg, and whose husband Alan died, and others were speaking at the microphone. There were people like John McCain. I know Senator Joe Lieberman from Connecticut was there for sure, and a number of other members of Congress from New Jersey especially who were there hearing the families speak. And this was a catalyst, together with Kristen Breitweiser speaking on Chris Matthews' Hardball in late August of 2002, to creating political pressure. And especially when Kristen Breitweiser spoke before the joint 9/11 inquiry of the intelligence committees of both Congress and the U.S. Senate in September 18, 2002. And she had a long list of questions about how could the FBI have the names of all of these terrorists so quickly, knowing, what grocery store, what airport.
Right. They knew like something, and FBI knew to visit a store in Bangor, Maine only hours after the attacks. And you include that segment of her questions right there before the forward of your book.
Yeah, it's incredible to, like on the one hand, the official story is like the Keystone Cops, nobody could connect the dots. And then immediately after the attacks, or even as they're happening, there are all kinds of people who are connecting the dots precisely with military precision, or with,
Right.
remarkable professionals.
Yeah, they had complete biographies already. They knew the flight schools, the neighborhoods where they lived. It was really incredible. So they didn't know that before, but after they knew.
Yeah, so after they knew. And so the families, this is an interesting thing about writing this book, because if I'd been writing a book about the last 20 years, the emergence of and growth of the 9/11 truth movement, it would be a different book, because folks in the 9/11 truth movement have gone to places around asking head-on questions about government complicity. And the family story of how they get to that place is a different one. Imagine that you've just lost someone in your family in this spectacular political event that's happened, in your own domestic soil. I can understand how many families will want to believe what their president, what their defense secretary, and all of these other people in powerful positions are telling them, because they want to believe that something like this that matters so much and has affected them so deeply, that they're going to be told something which is ballpark the truth. And so that is sort of the beginning place for the families. And Kristen Breitweiser writes in her memoir, Wake Up Call, at the cusp of the families, getting the investigation going in the winter of 2002, she talks about how, nearly 3,000 people were murdered, and four of these, herself, Patty Casaza, Mindy Kleinberg, and Lori Van Auken, four of their husbands were among those murdered. I mean, that is the perspective that the families have going into the inquiry. And then things start to happen. President Bush finally caves to the pressure on the Capitol, and he names Dr. Henry Kissinger to be the head of the investigation. And Kissinger, with his connections to the September 11th, 1973 coup in Chile and other things. He's wanted as a war criminal in different countries around the world. And there's all kinds of mainstream reporting going on with the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune and the LA Times and Seattle Post-Intelligencer, all calling into question the judgment of this being the person named to head up an inquiry who's got a long track record for secrecy.
Right, and it was really fascinating. You had a little piece sequence, I think, in the second chapter, where the FSC or these women go and meet Kissinger at his office. Can you talk about that?
So they come because it's late November, early December of 2002, cold in New York City, and I think it's Park Avenue offices, and they go up there, and Kissinger has turned up the heat, literally. The thermostat is at the height of what it can be, 86, whatever it is, 28 Fahrenheit. And so these women who are coming in, wearing winter garb, start to have to peel off their coats and sweaters because it's just so too darn hot, as Cole Porter might say. And so Kissinger's being very evasive, and so Lori Van Auken asks the question. She says, Dr. Kissinger, it's important that this inquiry run, above board. We just want to make sure that you have no conflict of interest, that you have no clients by the name of Bin Laden, given that this is the prime suspect that the government has said has orchestrated the attacks. And at that moment, Dr. Henry Kissinger, who's pouring coffee for the FSC members, spills it all over the coffee table, practically falls off his seat, loses his balance, and then blames it on a fake eye. And then the next day resigns as chair of the 9/11 Commission.
So he was confronted, and that was pretty much kind of probably was something that sealed his fate on that. But they talked about that. There was also kind of an exposure of the PNAC documents and things like. There was also, can you talk about that? The PNAC documents, why they're important to the story, and what led to? Can you talk about that?
Sure. The Project for a New American Century is interestingly one of the questions that the families do ask the 9/11 Commission to investigate. And this was a document put together by this group, Project for a New American Century, which had, half a dozen to a dozen of the signers on that document were then members of the new Bush administration, Vice President Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, John Bolton, Paul Wolfowitz, and others who were signing it. And Beverly Eckert, who was interviewed by 911truth.org, said, kind of the perspective of the families was that it concerns them that in this time after the Cold War had ended, so to speak, with the kind of collapse of the former Soviet Union. Now, Russia's not at that time in the 1990s such a formidable adversary, and so there's a pressure to reduce defense spending. And so there are folks on the Project for New American Century that think that it would be really great for a new geopolitical overreach for the United States to have, quote, a new Pearl Harbor. And so families would like the people who are signers of the PNAC document to come before the 9/11 Commission and explain why they thought that a new Pearl Harbor would be a good idea.
Right. So there's that document before 9/11. And one of the things you also reference as a basis point for the research was the complete 9/11 timeline by Paul Thompson. Can you talk about his importance?
Yeah. So you've got the families who are, up late at night, trying to read the physical reports mostly of the papers, and some of them have computers, but they're trying to get what they can, by just reading things, going to public libraries to read, day-old copies of papers in Connecticut and Pennsylvania and New York City and so on. And then one of them comes across the what was then called the Complete 9/11 Timeline by researcher Paul Thompson, who in, I think, May or June of 2002 had begun to compile all the articles he could find that related to the attacks on September 11th, going back, way back to, say, the CIA's first involvement with creating a force in Afghanistan that would disrupt the Soviet Union, and Osama bin Laden and others are involved in that. And so he does this timeline eventually of over 5,000 news stories. And so the families were reading, they created binders and, cut and pasted articles into these binders, but there suddenly was Paul Thompson's timeline online for them with all these links so they could read very quickly. And those the articles that he had online then helped them expand the questions, because they wanted to read these stories that were all mainstream news stories. And then, from this New York Times article, this Washington Post or BBC article, then to form questions that they could put to the 9/11 Commission to ask this president, that vice president, Donald Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, different agencies, CIA, Defense Department, FAA, so that the 9/11 Commission could be posing the urgent and relevant questions to vigorously pursue wherever the evidence led.
Right. And so the Bush administration is kind of hesitating, doesn't want to move forward, but they finally relent. And the 9/11 Commission starts, I think, in September of 2003. Can you talk about the formation of the commission and what happened right from the beginning?
Sure. So, it's actually in November of 2002. The commission begins, and interestingly, Bush gets to name who. They name Tom Keene, Republican governor of New Jersey, and then Lee Hamilton, who's the Democrat nominee to be the co-chair. And Lee Hamilton, he has a connection with the Iran-Contra scandal. He was involved in the Iran-Contra inquiry, and his public statements to the press were he didn't like to ever go for the jugular. And so when he hears Oliver North speak to him in person, and Oliver North apparently is lying about his involvement in the Iran-Contra affair in the 1980s, Lee Hamilton says that he just believed him. And Lee Hamilton is also someone with a long history of close personal friendship going on fishing trips or other things with both Vice President Dick Cheney and Secretary of State Donald Rumsfeld. So the optics regarding conflict of interest, would a close personal friend of the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense be impartial, or is there going to be a slanted bias on the part of Lee Hamilton to not go anywhere that might end up embarrassing his close friends?
Right. And the commission itself, they were kind of hobbled from the beginning. Would you agree with that?
Well, they are, and they're hobbled from the beginning because they're given a $3 million budget. In contrast to the $70 million budget to investigate the Clintons with Monica Lewinsky and Whitewater, and so it's a tiny little budget. And in addition to that, they don't have they've given an office space which I think is related to intelligence, either CIA or Defense Intelligence, but because of the location of the office for the 9/11 Commission, all of the people who were on staff, the 80 staff who were doing the work for the commission, plus the commissioners themselves, have to get security clearance. And so you've got people who are taking up to 4 months to be able to have even their first visit to the 9/11 Commission office because of its location. You also it takes a long time for the commission to even get their own phone or coffee maker or fax machine or photocopier. It's incredible to think that something as important as that would be hobbled by things like
Right. And they didn't allow for public hearings. You would think that this would necessitate public hearings for the entire public of the United States to see the research. But to have that, and then they limited subpoenas, I think, right? Or they didn't want to give subpoenas.
Yeah, they had Lee Hamilton was dead against having any public hearings. The 9/11 Commission eventually decided that they would have 12 public hearings, which ran over 18 days, and they had Mary Fetchett, whose son Brad died in the South Tower. They had Monica Gabrielle, whose husband Richard died in the South Tower, both speaking early on. Mindy Kleinberg, Sally Reaganhart, whose son, probationary firefighter Christian, was also died. These people are speaking, but in addition to this, you have other people, Dr. Lori Milroy and Abraham Sofar, who are really there before the 9/11 Commission to pitch as a sales pitch for the Iraq War. And so some of the choices that the 9/11 Commission is making, which are really made by the executive director, Philip Zelikow, to kind of shift and shape the direction of who's asked questions and who's not asked questions.
Right. And Zelikow himself was a questionable character. Can you talk about him?
Zelikow had a former, close relationship with Condoleezza Rice, had co-authored a book about Russia, had also been the person principally involved in writing the policy paper about preemptive war and the whole strategy to go to war in Iraq. So it would seem that having somebody who's so connected with the plan to go to Iraq and to go to war in Iraq, being involved in the 9/11 Commission, further raised questions of family members and also members of the 9/11 Commission itself. Max Cleland, who was from Georgia, was really upset that he wanted to press the 9/11 commissioners to investigate if the events of 9/11 were somehow connected to the war in Iraq. Was there a pretext? And the commissioners didn't want to go there, and Max Cleland resigned. And when he resigned, he was replaced by Bob Kerrey, who I would say for a long time, given some of Kerry's later statements, because he was interested in having a permanent 9/11 commission, he said in 2008. But at the time, Bob Kerrey, when he's replacing Max Cleland in 2003, he's on the committee for the liberation of Iraq. So he's staunchly involved in a group that's full of war hawks that are all promoting the goodness of the war in Iraq.
Right. It's incredible. And I think you wrote in your book, like Rove was contacting with Zellico when he was on the head. So there's like cross-pollination or discussions with the administration. So it's not independent. And I thought it was fascinating when you wrote about this outline that he had about the conclusion of the report. Can you talk about the outline and what happened in the report?
Yeah. Well, the report, most investigations begin at the beginning. And sure, you have people who may have some hunches about what happened at the beginning, but they decide to receive all of the tips on following different leads, and they follow those leads and go wherever they take them. And then they write up their report or take their case to before a judge, the police do, and say, here's our case, and now we want to have a trial, or here's where the inquiry has taken our report, now we're going to write it up. However, with the 9/11 Commission, Philip Zellico and the senior counsel, Ernst May, write up an outline of all the chapter headings and the subheadings, which show basically the direction of where the report will go and where it in fact did go. And so, Bob McIlvaine, whose son Bobby Jr. died entering the North Tower from a blast, says it's just incredible and scandalous that a report about trying to have Americans know what happened would be written with such prejudice at the beginning and not looking under all kinds of rocks that should have been looked under.
It's just incredible. So it seemed compromised from the beginning, and they came out with the final report. The FSC says it was September 11th happened because of failure of imagination. Can you explain what your view of the final report is after it came out?
Okay, so the final report, reflects all of the boxes that get ticked in the creation of the outline in February, March of 2003. So in 2004 in July, when the report comes out, you see all these almost identical or slightly revised title chapters and subheadings of the whole report. So the families are looking at it, and they're there are some people who embrace it right away, and others. I'd say about half the folks on the FSC are quite convinced by the government story, and about half of the folks are skeptical. But they have to read the report. And I'd say also it's interesting that in May and June of 2004. The FSC is still, they have lots of criticism of the way that the 9/11 Commission keeps going off track, not subpoenaing, not doing the kind of asking the hardball questions that they should be, saying nice things like, that's a really great suit you're wearing, wasting their 5 minutes. But they're still saying, as a body, the FSC is saying, that they accept the story of the 19 hijackers and bin Laden. But it takes, after the 9/11 Commission report comes out, and after people start to read it through the fall and winter of 2004, then there are people saying, did the Commission get it right? And in July of 2005, Lori Van Auken and Monica Gabrielle and one other person I forget are there with Cynthia McKinney having a day where the Congress is investigating a year after the report with lots of questions. And Lori Van Auken, says that, we always said if there are conspiracy theories out there, it is the government's fault because they did not ever really explain or show or want us to know what happened.
And I mean, that's a perfect segue into the next section of the book, part 3, that references the title of your book, Unanswered Questions, because you have all of these sections that the FSC is asking. I think it's like 10 or 11 about what they should have asked, right?
Yes, they should be asking, why did the planes evade radar? They should be asking, how could these planes be flying around in U.S. domestic airspace when since 1958 it's been protocols for all flights to have to get approval from the air traffic control tower to have a flight path, to be able to fly at a certain altitude, and if they change that altitude or flight path at all while they're in the air, they have to get permission from the nearest air traffic control tower to do so because of weather events or whatever. And so when you have a flight going 2 miles off course, there have been well over 10,000 or more flights that have been intercepted routinely with military precision, with 100% accuracy and achievement on the part of the U.S. military, because the U.S. Air Force's motto is guarding the nation's skies.
Right.
And so suddenly you've got 4 planes flying around for nearly 2 hours, hijacked planes with no military response. And you've got families who are affected by this, who are actually part of the military, and it doesn't make sense to them.
And there's just so many unanswered questions. Why was it cleaned up so fast? Why didn't George Bush return to the White House? There's just all kinds of strange elements. I mean, it's very important for people to get this book and look at how many questions there still are after 20 years. It's really remarkable.
Well, thank you. I mean, and I had to make choices about, well, which questions am I going to try and tackle in this book? Because it's just like a peek at it, because there are, hundreds of questions. And so, but it's interesting how the families, begin to shift after the 9/11 report comes out, because in the summer of August of 2005, the New York Times then releases the 503 testimonies of the firefighters of New York, Department of New York, who gave their oral histories to their senior staff in the fall and winter of 2001, 2002. And you have these 503 testimonies. And if you care to read through the 12,000 pages as I have, I took about one a day over a year and a half, because I didn't know these people. But over 100 of these first responders describe in their efforts to rescue people that they encountered what they describe as, quote, explosions, bombs, secondary devices going off. And so the families, it just raises more questions for the families. And so then begins more requests for a new transparent investigation to try and account for this kind of data.
Right. So there's stuff that was left out of the 9/11 Commission report, and there's still tons of questions. I mean, where are we now? What's the situation with the FSC, and are there any kind of things that are coming up on the horizon?
Yeah, well, the FSC as a formal body dissolved in January of 2005, but they say so long in their final press release saying, we're going to still be watching and monitoring this. So over the years, you have 4 of the members of the former FSC members in 2010, I think it is, jointly released a press release with the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, asking for information about the explosions, reported explosions in the World Trade Center and buildings 1 and 2 and World Trade Center 7. And they're asking these as open-ended questions. They're not saying we know who did this. They're just saying this is an elephant in the room and it needs to be addressed. And so you've got people. Bob McIlvaine came together with others, other family members in 2017 for a Bobby McIlvaine World Trade Center Investigation Act that went before Congress, and members of Congress didn't want to touch it. But there's other family members who last year asked for the National Institutes for Standards and Technology or Transportation to correct the record of how World Trade Center Building 7 fell. And so there are these continued efforts by families. Matt Campbell, whose brother Jeff died in the Twin Towers. It has an inquest going to reopen the inquest into his brother's death, and that's happening in the UK.
Gotcha. And we're almost at 40 minutes. Where's the best? I mean, it comes out September 11th. Where's the best place for people to find the book or get the book?
Just learned yesterday the book, which I have actually not received yet, my physical copy. I'll get it next week sometime. People can begin to order now copies of Unanswered Questions through their local independent bookstores. Ingram Spark is the distributor in the USA. I've seen now that the book is now available hardcover, paperback, with ebook coming soon on Amazon, and it's also available in some versions on Barnes and Noble. The book's in the middle of being uploaded with the files this week. So next week, people should be able to certainly order the book.
Excellent. And there's so much more. We covered the intro, but there's so many questions and so much information in here. I highly recommend people check out this book. Go and get it. Where's the best place if people want to reach out to you or ask you questions? Social media, email? What's the best option?
Sure. They can look me up on Twitter, which is at Ray McGinnis, and then numeral 7, which is kind of like World Trade Center 7. And then I'm also at www.unansweredquestions.ca. CA for Canada, but just like California.
Gotcha. And the title of the book again is Unanswered Questions: What the September 11th Families Asked and the 9/11 Commission Ignored, publishing on September 11th, 2021. And the author is Ray McGinnis. Ray, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, William. Great to talk to you.
Likewise. Take care. All right, you still there?